Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday night live stream. We have Paul Mark, great to see you. Hope you're well. We have also Freckle Punny, great to see you. Frederick is here. Aki's Mad, great to have you on up there in Scotland. We also have Freddie B, great to see you. Who else have we got tonight? We have David McGuinness. Make sure to check out Indie Truck Davies YouTube channel. All things Scotland there. Do check it out and do become a subscriber if you can. We also have Reagan Elite. Great to see you, Reagan. Hope you're fine. Another great YouTuber. Check out Reagan Elite's YouTube channel. Alistair, great to see you. Hope you're fine. Hope you're well tonight. We also have Billy. Great to see you. Suzanne is here. Who else have we got? Young Ralph. Great to have you on, Young Ralph. Hope you're fine. Mark is here. Great to see you. We also have Raven 1983 Witch, great to see you once again. Keller, thanks for moderating tonight. Hope you're fine. John O'Sullivan is here. We also have Enzo the God, great to see you. Who else have we got? So I just got a notifications about a buffering or something. Hopefully that's not too bad. We have CGM, great to see you. Hope you're fine tonight. Steve is here. Rod is here. Stefan is here. And Roshin is here. Great to see you. Ansi, great to have you on. And so many more. Hope you're all very well. I hope everything is working. There's no buffering problems. I hopefully everything will run quite smoothly tonight. So, hope you had a nice weekend. We heard the news, of course, about King Charles being diagnosed with cancer. So, as I said already, I wish him a speedy recovery. And I think it's important not just to focus on the King, but everyone who's no buffering here. That's great, Frederick. Thanks for the icon as well. Everyone who's suffering from cancer or other very serious illnesses at this moment, they need our support. And I wish them a speedy recovery, not just the King. So just talk a little bit about I'm not going to focus too much on it. One of the main political stories of today, of course, is another conservative faction, another Tory wing. How many do they have now? 12, 15, 75. I'm not sure how many it is. Just it says here, the King has had to step back from public-facing duties as he undergoes cancer treatment. We're now expecting to see his siblings and his children rally around to do what they can to help him. But how will Buckingham Palace ensure the King stays visible to the public, and will we see more of Prince William? So, yeah, it depends on the type of treatment. I don't know. They've been talking about something related to the bladder. I don't know if that's true or not, but whatever treatment he needs, he'll need to stay away from the public for a while, and no doubt somebody will fill his shoes for a bit. He's getting the best treatment in the country, so I think he will recover from this. Of course, he's not young, which doesn't help, but I think he's probably been getting regular checkups, and if as the cancer has appeared, I'm pretty sure that they will be able to deal with it, and he'll be back on his feet pretty soon. Joe Lefty Bocher, great to see you on the stream. We also have Bill Silver, Yura, Jim, Mark Leslie, Sean, great to see all of you. Hope you're fine tonight. Shell is here, great to see you. Sir Larry the Cat, the Popcons. Sounds like a bad Japanese pop band. Yes, it does. Let's move on to the Popcons in just a moment. Sonic wished Charles a swift recovery. Piers Morgan has said, what a bet. Yes. So I wasn't going to talk about Piers Morgan and Rishi Sunak, but my God, like, could he not think for a moment, like, Piers Morgan tries to make a bet with you. You're the Prime Minister. Hi, Bill Siver. Your automatic response should be, look, I'm not going to bet on things like this. This is trivializing a very serious issue. You know, stopping the boats, dealing with immigration, whether you agree with them or not. But you don't get into a bet with somebody like Piers Morgan, okay? This journalist, if you want to call him that. It was really crass, and the optics were terrible. Now, of course, the the Tory MPs were rolled out to face the media to explain, oh, well, you know, it's not that serious and there's nothing really to see here. I really wish a journalist, when they asked a Tory MP about this, I would ask them, would you react the same way if it was Keir Starmer? Would you react the same way if it was a member of another party? You know, and they'd have to say, oh, well, yes, I would act the same way. And then you can keep that. And then the next time, like if something like that happens in the future, then you show it to them. Oh, well, now Keir Starmer has said he'd make a bet and you're attacking him. Well, this is what you said about Rishi Sunak many years ago. As Prime Minister, you could fire whatever assistant suggests that you go anywhere near Piers Morgan. Yes, that would be a good idea. Do not do interviews with Piers Morgan. Don't do interviews with anyone. I think that's probably the best approach, because he also got a bit of a roasting as well on BBC Live 5 Live, where he was asked about poverty and he started talking about vaping. Anyway, let's get into this clip where James O'Brien talks about this new Liz Truss group.
There's a new gang in town, and it's led by Liz Truss.
It's led by, well, technically it's led by Mark Littlewood, who used to be head of the IEA, the Institute of Economic Affairs. He's the director, and he gave the opening and closing remarks today, where he welcomed some of his friends onto the stage. And those friends that he welcomed were Liz Truss, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, Mari Fraser. Firstly, the audience, there was, I mean, you had everyone from Lord Frost, Nigel Farage, to David Starkey. I mean, it was
wonderful people.
It was it was certainly an interesting bunch of members who were there. Now, Mark Littlewood sort of set the ground, really, by having a go at quangos and said there are over 500 quangos in this country, and said they are ruling Britain at the moment.
There's a bit of irony there. Mark Littlewood was, or I don't know if he's still, a member of the IEA. And this was one of the think tanks that was advising Liz Truss about cutting taxes for the richest in society. So, you know, it's a bit ironic that he's saying you should stop organising these groups and having these quangos, you know, telling you what to do.
And then the first speaker was Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. They all had different arguments, James. The crux of Jacob Rees-Mogg's speech was with regards to international institutions. So he said the Davos man is ruling the country at the moment. He then said that Tony Blair had been, in a way, quite sinister, and he felt that he had purposefully, for instance, tied the UK in with the Equality Act, the Human Rights Act and the Environment Act,
which are terrible. Can you imagine the Human Rights Act, the Equality Act and the Environmental Protection Act? Can you imagine these things have to go, of course. Remember, we're getting back to this idea of Brexit. When it came to Brexit was twofold. It was about convincing poor people that their enemy was poor people, other poor people, and it was about cutting regulations and taxes, reducing the size of the state and reducing the ability of the state to go after corruption, because it was about protecting corruption. It was about making sure that the richest in society could get richer, and companies and businesses who don't like to follow rules wouldn't have to follow any more rules, or would have to follow fewer rules.
Which were only there to give power to judges and to sort of bind Parliament's successors, in the word of Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. He also went on to criticise many international institutions.
How do we allow this country to be properly run and raise the standard of living for all our voters? By giving them freedom over their lives and taking it away from the unaccountable, the faceless, the bureaucrat, and the pious platitudes of pompous politicians which have been...
The pious platitudes of pompous politicians. This is Jacob Rees-Mogg talking. Can you think of a more pompous politician than Jacob Rees-Mogg? Maybe Boris Johnson, but I think on pompousness, Jacob Rees-Mogg wins out. Maybe Sir Ron Van T will be more pompous than Jacob Rees-Mogg, but I think they're on a level footing there.
Been running this country for too long. Popular conservatism is the answer.
Sorry, what? Pardon? He just Let's use global player, can we? And rewind that.
The pious platitudes of pompous politicians which have been running this country for too long.
So Jacob Rees-Mogg is criticising other people for being...
The pious platitudes of pompous politicians which have been running this country for too long.
Gosh.
Yes, and he wasn't referring to himself. He was referring to Sir Tony Blair and many members of the new Labour government, which he pointed out a bit later on.
It's never... Jacob Rees-Mogg would never be pompous. He would never be telling people what to do. So Ron Vinty will put grease mug back in his box. This guy is insane. So are his mates. They're in charge. Yes, it's always, the party that has been in power for 14 years are saying it's nothing to do with us. If we were in power, things would be much better. They're talking as if they were in opposition, of course. And I think this is what this whole conservative, popular conservatives group is about. I think they understand that they're going to lose at the next election. They're creating a sort of group maybe within Parliament, but not so much within Parliament. But I think they want to create a sort of platform for themselves where they can attack future governments for not being conservative, or not looking after the taxpayer, or not, not doing enough to deal with wokeness or whatever. And I think they're going to be attacking the Labour Party, of course, from the right, but they're going to be attacking the Labour Party, saying that, they don't care about the country, they're not patriotic, they believe in higher taxes and stuff like this. So they're attacking. I think the attacks on Rishi Sunak are just a warm-up for what will come next. Because if you think about it, people like Lee Anderson, he's going to lose his seat at the next election. So what is he going to do? He can go back to GB News, but he's no longer valuable to GB News. I don't think he's all that valuable to GB News anyway. But as an MP, he was more valuable. As one of the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, he was useful. But now that he's a nobody, he'll either be let go, or if he's held on, well, he'll be in a much diminished role. So I think he will be let go. So even Jacob Rees-Mogg, but what does Lee Anderson do from now on? What is he going to do after the election? Well, he's probably going to join one of these groups, or be part of one of these groups, where he's going to probably be paid a wage just to go on TV and spew, anti-woke stuff and how taxes need to be lower and stuff like this. A bit like... some of these sinister figures within, on the outside of politics, not in the Parliament, not in the Tory party, but on the outside. Some of these think tanks as well. So they get invited onto the BBC, they get invited onto Newsnight, onto Sky News, and they're able to use that as a platform to push their narrative. And I think Lee Anderson and others will be doing that. But I could be wrong. Next
on stage, James, at this sort of huge Conservative Glastonbury was Mari Fraser, who is standing in Epsom and Ewell. As you say, there are those comments.
There's a clip of him on the News Agents Max. Yes, can someone post the link? No, I've actually done a response video to it. It's really good. So Jacob Rees-Mogg getting a bit upset, I should say, with... if somebody can post a link in the chat, I've lost the link myself, but if somebody can post it in the chat, I'll bring it up. But it's or I can find it here actually. Well, we'll go through this and then I'll show you the link with Jacob Rees-Mogg. But he got very upset with the journalists
about Donald Trump in the past, and goodness me, she made some. I mean, for instance, came out unequivocally against the smoking ban. She said it's creating a ludicrous two-tier system. She said once one freedom is surrendered, others follow because the state is no Mary Poppins.
All of these headbangers are like, we need to reduce the size of the state, and of course, this is rhetoric. I keep saying. They don't care about freedoms and stuff like that. They care about moving the country further to the right. They care about moving politics to the right because it will eventually benefit their donors. They want lower taxes. They want fewer regulations. This is their goal. And in order to achieve this, they need to talk about cultural issues. They don't really care about cultural issues. It's a bit like Republicans in the US where they say we're we're dead set against abortion until my mistress needs to have an abortion. You know, they're two-faced. They don't have principles unless it's we need to make money, more money for our friends and donors.
Let's not forget Nanny on her most monstrous form, which was the COVID lockdowns.
Oh, no, we're back to these again. These headbangers who are like anti-lockdown, and then lockdowns are over and they're still talking about lockdowns.
And then she said, it's time to put Nanny to bed.
Did they chant, what do we want? Lung cancer. When do we want it? Now. Was there any of that going on there? Was it? Or
no,
not?
there's a lot of support of
No, I'd leave that more for the IEA people.
Applause, actually, from people in the room for that. Then was Lee Anderson, of course, a familiar face. He said, how many people lie awake at night wondering if we'll get to net zero by 2050? And said there was one Green candidate who he thinks, and no one else lies awake at night worrying about getting to net zero by 2050.
Okay. Lee Anderson also talked about how coal is renewable because it's made from trees and plants and stuff. Okay. Renewable in the sense of over 100 years. Look, I was going to respond to that, but there's just so much bullshit. It's difficult to respond to all of it. I'd be making videos all day long. Like you had Liz Truss, you had Jacob Rees-Mogg, and then you also have Lee Anderson talking absolute twaddle. Mithril, thank you so much for those memberships. Thank you for sending out those memberships. Very kind of you. It helps the channel a great deal. Aki's Mad has one. We also have Shell with one. Yoni has one. Stu has one, and the Joe Lefty Boater has one as well. Thank you so much, Mithril. That's very kind of you. Greatly appreciated. Yes, 30p Lee is now Mr. Green Coleman. Grow concrete, reduce CO2. Liz Truss should be sanctioned. Liz Truss should have had the whip removed from her. I agree with you. She should be sanctioned. But she also should have the whip removed from... Like, why didn't Rishi Sunak remove the whip as soon as she was replaced? Because said, okay, break from the past. She destroyed the economy. She damaged the Conservative Party. Out she goes. Now we're going to have... we're going to bring in somebody else. Let me bring up this clip with the news agents. Okay. With Jacob Rees-Mogg. Here we go.
You railed against Davos now. How much money did you make in the city? That rather is irrelevant.
That's such a childish question. I've never had anything to do with Davos, and I know that you've become a very left-wing broadcaster.
What will success for this project look like, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
What we're doing is talking about the ideas that conservatism needs. So it's a question of whether people find these ideas resonate with them. That will be a success.
You have been in power for 14 years and you're talking about new ideas.
Is it not rather pathetic for members of a party, senior members of a party like yourself, who've been in government for 14 years, to rail against the system? If you don't mind my saying so, you sound rather left-wing. You sound rather like a sort of right-wing Bennite, constantly saying, you know, power is the problem, institutions are the problem, they have to be changed.
No, I think you've got it fundamentally wrong. That we had no ability to change the system until we'd left the European Union. We then had COVID. And all parties at all times need to be thinking about the structures of government, how things work, how they operate. Because the way to get things done is through the structures of government. And sometimes they need changing, and they were changed very effectively by Tony Blair.
So Tony Blair changed the system, but we couldn't change the system until we left the European Union. But when Tony Blair was in power, Britain was a member of the European Union.
Didn't have power to change the schooling system?
We did change the schooling system.
But then you changed. Then what are you talking about? We haven't the power to change things until we left the European Union, but you changed the schooling system.
As Truss said, perhaps you should have listened to her speech.
I did listen to it. And
she said one of the things we did successfully was in education.
And yet she talked about wokeism in schools. If there's wokeism in schools, your government could remove it at a stroke, surely.
Not at a stroke. No, you need to legislate.
First, you need to define it. What is wokeism? We don't even know what wokeism is, and Jacob Rees-Mogg wants to get rid of it. Like, how can you get rid of something you can't even define? I really wish somebody would ask Jacob Rees-Mogg, please, can you give us a definition of woke? Because we hear a lot about it, but we've yet to hear what it is. We've heard what it isn't. We've heard that people want to get rid of it. We heard that it's bad, but we've yet to hear an actual definition.
And new guidelines have been issued, say these things are moving in the right direction. But we need to move further and faster.
Was it further and faster and break things? That's the Liz Truss way.
This is the whole life and blood of politics.
You railed against Davos, Matt.
Yeah, legislate against understanding and justice. That's what we need. Well, look, think about it, Chris. When Rishi Sunak said that Rwanda was safe, he just created legislation to define Rwanda as a safe country. So he can easily legislate against wokeness. He can legislate about understanding and justice. There, it's simple.
How much money did you make in the city? That rather is relevant.
That's such a childish question.
How dare you ask me questions about how much money I made while I'm an MP? He acts as if he's a member of the public or some business owner, and he's like, how much money did you make? Yeah, you shouldn't be asking me these questions. How dare you ask me questions about my personal, my wealth as a public frigging representative?
I've never had anything to do with Davos, and I know that you've become a very left-wing broadcaster.
And here we go. And I mentioned this in the clip, in the video as well. This is about him attacking the journalist. So the journalist asks a question, and instead of actually answering the question, you attack the journalist. That shows you in a very strong position, doesn't it? Somebody asks you, how much money did you make? And you start attacking the journalist. It means that you have something to hide. And of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg lives in I don't know how many Victorian mansions, and you can imagine the wardrobes full of skeletons that he has.
But asking me lefty questions doesn't really get us anywhere.
It's not a matter of left or right. It's a matter of probing your position,
I
Mr.
never had
Rees-Mogg.
anything to do with Davos.
No, but Davos...
Keep your hands to yourself. Good Lord. Like, don't touch me. Don't touch me. You're unwashed. You're one of the poorer classes. Don't get in my face. It's a privilege that you actually have the chance to speak to me. How much money did he make putting Oliver Twist to work? I think that's the tweet of the night. How much money did he make putting Oliver Twist through workouts? I think it was a significant amount of money. At least 12 shillings.
Davos, I would imagine what you're suggesting by talking about Davos is a sense
this
of
level
a man...
of internationalism.
Yes.
I'm in favour of the nation state, which was...
I thought, remember, it was the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization became pretty sour after a bit. Remember, it was we don't need to be a member of the European Union. We want to be a member of the World Trade Organization, international, global Britain. Now it's all about no. We need to be like the North Korea of Europe.
Yes.
From my speech, if you've listened.
I listened to every word you said, but it still seems to me
carefully.
I listened extremely carefully, but it's possible and entirely appropriate that we try and probe
We're
some of the
happy to have a
intellectual
conversation.
positions. Good. I mean, it's not
But
one
you
of the
seem
problems.
to be representing the left wing. Are you doing your
How is he representing the left wing? He's asking you questions.
bit of due impartiality that Ofcom requires
Mr.
you? Or are
Mr.
you
Rees-Mogg,
here as a left-wing broadcaster?
Mr. Rees-Mogg, I know
I'm
that you're
very
rather
interested in this because
Mr.
this
Rees-Mogg,
comes up with GB News, which I broadcast
which
on.
of course is completely impartial. Mr. Rees-Mogg.
It meets the requirements of due impartiality, and
Well,
I'm
look. Stu, thank you so much for that super chat. Brexit was always about hiding money. Yes, it's about hiding money, but also I think about removing protections for workers, for the environment, and for the consumer. That's what part of it as well. So it's not just one thing, but it's many things. But part of it, I think the Jacob Rees-Mogg line of Brexit, of course, was about hiding money. Moving operations abroad so they can't be taxed. Thanks for that. And it's great that you're your first super chat. Maybe it's because you changed your name.
According to Ofcom, Mr. Rees-Mogg, I know that you want to go on the attack rather than talking about the issue.
Do you meet the requirements of
if you would allow to, absolutely. And unlike GB News, of course, which has repeated.
But he's representing a podcast. It's not covered by Ofcom, as far as I know. But the irony of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's an MP, questioning whether a journalist is impartial when he's an MP working for GB News, and broadcasting to the public and speaking to the camera, which is actually in breach of the rules. But it seems that Ofcom is not really interested in upholding the rules.
Strong left-wing view.
I'm not putting a strong left-wing view of anything. I'm simply trying to ask you and interrogate you about some... No, not at all. Well, according to your own summary, one more question. Is not one of the problems... Well, I would do if you allow me to actually ask a question.
Again. Please get the point.
Honestly.
He's trying to distract.
Is not one of the problems that Conservatives such as yourself have started to go down a track where you're not willing to accept trade-offs? Yes, we could pull out of all of these institutions and organisations, but ultimately there will be costs in so doing, just as there was with Brexit. And sometimes you start to talk about a world as you would like it to be, rather than the world as it is, which is exactly the sort of thing that Conservatives used to be very good at addressing.
No, the Conservative Party has always been a practical party, and there are always trade-offs with doing one thing or another. But parties have...
What was the trade-off with Brexit? You notice that he never mentions the trade-off. He didn't say, look, we got Brexit, but we had to give up this. Now, we know what the trade-offs were, but he will never mention them. Like, when it comes to sycophancy, Mogg is, of course, a Brexit sycophant. Now, people will accuse me of being an EU sycophant, but I'm not, because I can point to the problems in the EU, and we saw them recently actually when it came to farming. That's a problem within the EU. The EU is not perfect, far from perfect, it needs reform. But people like Mogg, because they're so ideologically driven with Brexit, they'll never say that there was a mistake. Oh, it's not been implemented correctly. It's not Brexit's fault. It's like a religion. You know, the Brexit God moves in mysterious ways, but you could never criticize it. Alistair, wow, time flies. 1 year. Wow, it's 1 year since you become a member. That's amazing. Time does fly. Great to have you on as always.
Have to talk about ideas, otherwise they get nowhere. You seem to wish to live in an ideas-free zone. It's quite extraordinary.
So once again, he's attacking the journalists because he knows that he's on shaky ground, and it's his modus operandi. When you ask me something difficult, ask me something I don't like, respond by attacking you. He did it with Marina Purkis as well when he had her on his show. And it's not about, in that case, he can challenge the person, but he's supposed to be answering the questions. But he's trying to get round it, of course. It's typical Mogg. In relation to this, Nigel Farage, Conservatives facing extinction event, and he's aiming to replace them. Ugh. So Farage believes it's possible to replace a Conservative Party with his own Reform Party, as he predicts an extinction event for the government at the next election. So this is something you're going to hear a lot about, where you're going to hear people like Mogg, Nigel Farage, opponents of Rishi Sunak say, look, we need to change, or the party is going to be destroyed at the next election. The party is going to be destroyed at the next election. It doesn't matter who they put in charge. Even if they dug up Margaret Thatcher and put her into number 10, it's not going to make any difference. People are upset about the cost of living crisis. They're concerned about rising costs. They're concerned about public services crumbling, the NHS waiting lists increasing dramatically over the last number of years, and nothing has been done about it. The Conservatives are going to lose on that. Mark my words. But what the right wing wants you to believe is that the reason the Conservatives will lose is because they don't have the right people in charge, or because they're not implementing Brexit correctly, or because they're not true Conservatives. And they'll say that, oh, see, we lost. See, we told you that would happen. We told you if you stuck with Rishi Sunak, it would be a disaster. We told you if you didn't go further to the right, you would lose support. That would be their narrative. I can guarantee you, I can bet you £1,000, like Rishi Sunak, that the day after the election, when Rishi Sunak, is forced out of number 10. He arrives at the podium and says, we have to, it was a good time, I tried my best, but it wasn't good enough. When if he still holds on to his seat, there's a chance that Rishi Sunak won't even hold on to his seat. But when the party collapses, the right wing will say, see, we told you it was this. Farage will be another one of them saying, I told you so. I told you that the party would fail if they didn't adopt Reform UK policies. Anyway, what does he say here? So Farage was speaking to Sky News political editor Beth Rigby at the launch of the Popular Conservatism PopCon group in Westminster. Headlined by former Prime Minister Liz Truss, who should have lost the whip. The group claimed it is not looking to replace Rishi Sunak as leader of the Conservatives, but spark a debate on ideas. Now, I think this is probably their approach. I don't think they want to replace Sunak. They want to see the party crash and burn, and then they can blame Sunak and his socialism. They've called it socialism for the reason why the party failed, and not focus on the real issue, which of course is the cost of living crisis. As to which party he wants to be in, Mr. Farage said, reform, no question about it. Speaking in a room full of Conservative MPs and activists, he added, I think at some point in time, a lot of people here today will draw the same conclusion. And I know that once every 100 years that these things happen, but I think we face the possibility that this could be the end of the road for the Conservative Party. Yeah, if reform, it depends on the polling, it depends on if there's some sort of tactical voting, but the Conservatives could end up losing really big at the next election. And of course, there will be a lot of soul searching. Okay, what do we do now? Should we move further to the right? Should we move back to the centre? I think it will depend on who holds on to seats. So I think if there's a majority of what's left over are moderates, then they will be able to dictate policy. Because a big problem at the moment as well is the leader is being chosen by the members. Now, Rishi Sunak wasn't the case with Rishi Sunak, but if the members who are more to the right than the MPs decide who the leader is, then you're going to have another shit show. You're going to have Kemi Badenoch or Suella Braverman in charge. But if the MPs decide, and I think it's more likely you're going to end up with more moderate MPs, they're probably going to hold on to their seats more than maybe the headbangers. Because if you look at the crazy people, a lot of them came in 2019, they're going to lose their seats. Lee Anderson, Jonathan Gules, people like that. But some of the moderates, I think, are also leaving because they're realizing, look, I've had enough of this. We're going to, there's a real risk in investing time and effort to try and hold on to my seat and not hold on to it. Farage and Truss, like an extreme version of her. What's that? Thanks, Brad. Extreme version of heroin, is it? Or herpes. I'm not sure which it is. Something horrible anyway, yes. I'm sick of being a wedge issue. I just want to live my life in peace. And it's so disgusting that what the right wing and the Tories are using trans issues and this culture war to drive a wedge between friends and family. People are being convinced that they need to hate each other, and unfortunately, it's open season at the moment. There's no control. There's no limit in what the Tories will do. Guys, let's take a short. We'll come back to this in a moment. Let's take a short comedy moment, and we'll be back in just a jiffy. Hope you enjoy this.
Colin is in Portsmouth. Hello, Colin.
I found it heartwarming, Anthony. Absolutely heartwarming.
Sorry, you found what heartwarming, Colin?
Piers Morgan and Rishi Sunak, two legends.
Right.
The prides of Britain finally coming together to solve the migrant crisis.
Yeah, they had a £1,000 bet on whether Sunak could deport anyone to Rwanda. You could only sink lower if you were in an overloaded dinghy crossing the English Channel, Colin.
And it brought a tear to my eye.
Yeah.
You metropolitan tofu-munching woke elites make me sick. Obsessed with holding 7-bid Sunak to account, but gambling with refugees' lives isn't the PC way to go about it.
Colin, he's reducing our status on the world stage to a bet between two rich old mates, Colin.
Well, that's what happened with Brexit. Why change a winning tactic?
Okay, fair enough, but it's crass in a cost of living crisis. You've got to admit that.
No, you're more likely to do something if it's your own money at stake.
True.
And if he loses, then the public can pay for it. That's what the Treasury's for. It's just win-win for Rishi.
Well, that's genius.
Perhaps if he put £1,000 on reducing NHS waiting lists, it would have happened by now. I don't know. Thank God for wealthy politicians, I say, and thank Murdoch for Piers Morgan. Anyway, mate, thanks for having me on. Love to the family.
Love to the family, Colin. Love to the family.
Now off to eat some pork scratches without paying the spare. again, Rishi.
Oh my God, that's the solution.
Represent Labour.
Okay, guys, I wanted to focus on this story for a little bit. This is the Labour Party in trouble because of what's happening over support from the Muslim community in Britain? So a significant majority of the Muslim community in Britain vote for the Labour Party. And there's a risk, or in England in particular, and there's a risk that Keir Starmer's position on Israel and Gaza may upset a significant number of people, and this could damage the party going into the general election. Let me just bring this down a little bit because it might cause some buffering.
Points out this does track back to an interview Sir Keir gave on my show back in October at the Labour Party's annual conference in Liverpool. Now, it was just days after the October 7th Hamas attacks. Here's my full exchange with Sir Keir on Israel's right to defend itself in the light of those attacks and other actions, so listen carefully. But I started off by asking Sir Keir what a proportionate response to the attacks would be.
I think the first thing I have to say is responsibility lies with Hamas. This is cold-blooded murder of men, women, even children. It is terrorism, and Israel has the right to defend herself. And there are ongoing situations with hostages, and Israel has the right to do everything that it can to get those hostages back safe and sound. And therefore, I'm very clear, Israel does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water, Sir Keir?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself and Hamas bears responsibility for these terrorist acts. And I would call on all responsible states, particularly Middle East responsible states, to call this out for what it is, and to stand with the world in utterly condemning these actions by Hamas.
Let's turn.
Okay, before we get to the other response from that, I said at the time, this was a stupid... Now, I'm not a political activist, I'm not an expert, but I said at the time, this is a disaster. What you need to do is you need to fall back on the UN position. You should say, look, this is what the UN believe. This is what the UN have said. The British government and the Labour Party respect the UN when it comes to what it says about the situation in Israel and Gaza. And this would have given him cover, political cover. If he was afraid about how it might, upset the Israeli government or the people of Gaza, he could have easily said, look, what's happening here is terrible. And we should rely on what the UN Secretary General has said about this. And he could have quoted the UN Secretary General. He says the UK is a member of the United Nations, and we respect their position on this, and we will look to them to take a position on that, instead of trying to follow Rishi Sunak or trying to outdo Rishi Sunak. And I think this is a massive problem here. Now, Starmer came back after and said 9 days later and said, look, I was tired. I didn't know what I was thinking. And then he just sort of regurgitated the same thing again. Once again, I keep thinking that what he should have said, and he could still do this, he said, look, this is what the UN has said. The UN is a internationally recognized body, respected body. They have said X, then we should be following their line of thinking. But he didn't.
And to Ali Milani, who's national chair of the Labour Muslim Network. And I must start by your reaction to this story on the front page of the newspaper, that canvassing of Muslim votes and voters is going on. Your reaction. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Nick. Thank you for having me. I feel like I've been warning about this for months now. In fact, I did so on your show not long ago.
I remember talking with you, yeah.
Yeah, that this is a serious problem. This isn't a situation we wanted to find ourselves in, absolutely. The Muslim community has been one of the longest and most loyal serving communities to support Labour anywhere in the country. In fact, in 2019, 83% of registered voters who are Muslim supported the Labour Party. But we are now in an absolute crisis point. We are in a position where Labour is about to dismantle one of its longest serving and most loyal voter bases anywhere. And it was entirely avoidable. So I am dismayed at this story, but absolutely not shocked.
How was it avoidable?
Well, we could have started, first of all, by not having the interview that you just played. And I've got to commend you because I think you're questioning...
Okay, but that's not a solution. We could have not had... I think if Stormer and the Labour Party had referred to the UN's position, that would have been acceptable. Said, look, this is what the UN have said. This is our way of thinking too. And he could have easily fallen back onto that, but he didn't. Now, Maxine, the Spotlight comment interested. Didn't see.
Was absolutely clear that there was no question of ambiguity. And Sakir's LBC interview was one of the most damaging things that's happened in this crisis, suggesting that cutting off water, fuel and aid to Palestinian civilians and children in hospitals was hugely damaging. The position on...
Once again, if the UN had said at the time, this is a war crime, this is not something you should be doing, this is potentially... It was early days, but they had said at the time, this is potentially in breach of humanitarian law. Now, Keir Starmer should know that, and Keir Starmer should have just said, look, if the UN is saying this, then we should be deeply concerned. If the UN is saying this is in breach of international law, in breach of humanitarian law, then we would refer to them. And if this is the case, then we need to do something about it. And I think, people in Israel may not be happy about that, but it wouldn't be seen as pandering to them. That's what it seems to be the case, that he was pandering to the Israeli government, pandering to elements, I don't know, within British politics, pandering to the media. Maybe he was expecting the media were trying to get one over him or make him, trying to get him to say something they didn't believe. I don't know. But I think, once again, you rely on something that's independent. But politicians do it all the time when they're talking about we're attacking the government on taxes or on inflation or whatever. They refer to the OBR. They refer to the IMF, whatever. They refer to international recognized entities and say, look, well, they're saying this, so it's not me, and this is a good way of getting out of the problem. And I'm not talking about trying to be sly or anything like that, but it's a way of saying, look, we're not taking an approach to this, a personal approach or a political approach. This is what the UN is saying, and and we generally refer to the UN for these when it deals with these types of crises.
Palestinian recognition has been shocking. The suggestion that recognition of a Palestinian state is somehow in the gift of other states and part of a process where Israel is recognized unilaterally as it should is shocking. But also it's the way that Palestinians have been spoken about throughout this crisis. We've had nearly 10,000 dead children, 26,000 dead people, most of whom are civilians. And Muslim communities are watching these people live, the dead pictures on their social media feeds and on the news. And what they're seeing from the Labour Party is a complete dehumanization of these lives. There's no empathy, there's no sympathy, there's no recognition of the absolute tragedy that's coming out of the region. And they're looking at themselves and saying, why would we support a party that doesn't support our lives?
How can you not...
So we'll move on from this because it's a very difficult, and I'm not in a position to really talk about this because I don't know. I'm not informed enough to respond to it. Some people have mentioned a UBI, so they want me to talk about a UBI instead, universal basic income. Well, definitely when it comes to poverty, Rishi Sunak was talking about poverty today, and that would be one way of dealing with poverty, of course. Changing direction somewhat. This is an interesting story here.
So there's no evidence to suggest that there is a majority for United Ireland in Northern Ireland. Actually, quite the reverse. So I checked the polling before I came in. Yeah. And amongst those people who expressed a view, there was 2-to-1 support almost for the union. in Northern Ireland. So at the moment, we seem to be very far from the conditions for a border poll, and there's no sign of that changing. I think it's become widely understood that it's always the moderate mainstream who decide these kind of questions, and the moderate mainstream of people want the priorities which actually both the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister have said they're going to work on, in particular healthcare. So,
okay, it's not about Northern Ireland, the people of Northern Ireland, it's the people of Ireland. But this is Brexit hardman Steve Baker we're talking about here, who blocked me on Twitter, so I can't actually respond to him directly. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I called him a Brexit hardman. But UBI again. But let's talk about the conditions. The Secretary of State will decide if the conditions are met for a border poll. Now, I think I haven't seen any recent polling, and polling is a bit of a problem because there isn't really a campaign. There is somewhat of a campaign for a United Ireland going on, but it hasn't really got many. It has got legs under it yet, and there isn't a real debate taking place in regards to a United Ireland. Now, I think when that starts, we would probably start to see the polls move somewhat. Now, I think unionists are looking at a situation where eventually Scotland is going to become independent. And then I think unionists are going to look at a diminished United Kingdom. And whether Scotland becomes independent first or there is a United Ireland first, I don't know. Depends on a number of issues. But one, I think, will help the other. So I think a case of Scotland becoming independent, support for United Ireland will be given a shot in the arm. But I think it's important to be, and I try to be as disconnected from this as impartial as possible, as neutral as possible when I talk about this issue, because I think it's important not to jump on board a bandwagon or anything. But it seems to be the case that there isn't a majority either way for a United Ireland or for the Union. Steve Baker is trying to say, yeah, well, there's still a majority for the Union. There isn't. It seems to be the case that there's a massive unknown, people who are not sure demographic. So there's a significant number who are like, it's not a case of yes or no, it's a case of yes, no, or don't know. And people don't know what a United Ireland would look like. People are familiar with the United Kingdom. But I think this is going to change over time, because if the UK diverges from EU standards, then it's going to create a border, it's going to create friction between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But even if the UK converges more with EU standards, this is going to still create a situation where Northern Ireland is still disconnected from the rest of the United Kingdom. And I think United Britain, if Wales stays. But I think it's a case of the people of Northern Ireland are starting to say, well, if the economy in Ireland is doing well and Britain outside the European Union, outside the single market, is not doing so well, then maybe we should have closer alignment with the Republic of Ireland. So we should be a more one Ireland economy. And I've always said it's going to be an economic union before it's a political one. So you're going to see more cooperation economically, north and south. And I think a softening of the unionist position would help that as well. So some unionists are talking about a border poll. Some unionists are talking about a United Ireland. Not that they are supporting it, not that they want it, but they're at least talking about it. And the more people talk about it, the more people's minds can be open to the idea. So this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. This is going to be something that's going to happen over the next 10 years. I think the next 10 years are going to be interesting, because we're going to have to look at how the Labour Party in power deal with Brexit, deal with the border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, deal with the DUP, because the DUP, are just back into the executive. But there are a lot of problems to be resolved in Northern Ireland, and we don't know what's going to happen at the next general election. So we don't know how the party makeup will be. The executive being in power with Sinn Féin as the biggest party, this could actually be damaging to Sinn Féin, because if the public see the executive not delivering, even though it's just been resuscitated, I think some people may blame Sinn Féin and the DUP over this, while it's the DUP's fault, of course. but people will not remember that. So I think this is a very difficult topic. It'd be interesting to speak with somebody in Northern Ireland about this when it comes to Northern Ireland, but also in the Republic, to understand, the positives and negatives of a united Ireland, the challenges facing a united Ireland, and when we could actually see it happen. But Steve Baker doesn't understand. Okay, guys. It's important to differentiate England from Scotland when it comes to, and England and Wales, but England and Scotland in particular when it comes to the NHS, because they're very different. This is a story that is getting a bit of traction, not as much traction as it should, but this is Tristan Cork Post, who posted this on Twitter yesterday about people queuing for a dentist appointment. So this is in Bristol. So many people that the police had to be brought in to avoid trouble.
Guys, the queue is finished, guys, okay? Unfortunately, you come back tomorrow to register and everything else. Basically, you just come back tomorrow, register the day after, the day after. Unfortunately, we haven't made the decision to end the queue. We're just helping the dentists. Yeah, I do appreciate the frustration. Yeah, sorry.
So the queue is finished. Come back tomorrow. These are all people queuing, as you can see here. This was the length of the queue yesterday. People queuing to register with an NHS dentist. There's been a huge campaign in St. Paul's to reopen the NHS dentist after one provider pulled out last year. So people can't afford to go to a private dentist, so they have to rely on the NHS dentist. And a big problem is the NHS England, and this is particularly a problem in England, NHS England is not providing dentists with reasonable contracts where they can actually afford to provide services, and the government are not providing the NHS with the funding it needs. Now, every time you hear about the Tories saying, we've increased funding for the NHS, the question that has to come back is it enough? And I would give my right arm to a journalist in Sky News and at the BBC or whatever to ask that follow-up question, is it enough? Because clearly it's not enough. This is the consequence of not having enough money for NHS dentists. And dentists have to, they have staff, they have facilities they have to maintain, they have equipment they have to buy, and they have to live. And if the contract is not sufficient, then they're going to have to work in the private sector. And this is we cannot blame dentists for doing this. This is a consequence of a bad working conditions, bad contract between the NHS and dentists. So if there is an NHS dentist, of course, people can't afford to go privately. They'll go to the NHS dentist where it's free or close to free. And people are going to queue days to get an appointment. This is the local MP.
Well, these long queues today and yesterday are symptomatic of what's happening up and down the country. In Bristol, I honestly can't remember the last time I came across a dentist that was offering any places, any registration for new patients. This is outrageous. The nearest dentist that I could find today to Bristol that's offering a new registration is 50 miles away and a 2-hour public transport journey there and back. It's just not good enough.
It's like 50 miles. 50 miles to the nearest dentist. These are problems, and I keep saying this, these are problems that the Labour Party are going to take over, and the Tories are going to snipe from the sidelines saying, oh, why aren't you fixing these problems? These are chronic problems. These are not things that can be fixed overnight. You can't just you can create a new contract, better contracts, but you're going to have to recruit dentists. This is going to take time. Some of them have to be trained up. People will have to be brought in from abroad. And unfortunately, this issue of freedom of movement, that, immigration, that's never talked about, it will have to be talked about. And I do hope that the Labour Party are going to face down racists and bigots in the Conservative Party and say, look, we need to bring people in because there aren't enough frigging dentists. We need to bring people in because we don't have enough staff. We need to bring people in because there aren't enough doctors, nurses, carers, whatever. And, to hell with the racists. I really wish the MPs would come out and say, which do you want? Racists who are happy for 5 minutes, or do you want a GP? Because that's the choice. That's the choice when it came to Brexit. Brexit was about reducing immigration. We don't want all these foreigners here. Oh, look, now what happened? We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough nurses, carers, people in hospitality, whatever. So we got this thing across the line. And what really pisses me off as well is where I hear online and particularly on the left, Lexiteers who are like, well, it was important for us to respect the vote. Respect the vote. It was built on lies. When Switzerland has a referendum, if there's any belief that there was something underhanded, it wasn't done correctly, it would be null and void. But beforehand, the public would be informed about the consequences of the referendum. In what way were people informed about Brexit? You had Nigel Farage on the BBC on almost a nightly basis with Brexit is the solution to all problems. And on the other hand, you had some expert who was confronted by Nigel Farage, who was like, okay, well, on the one side, you have an expert explaining. Do you notice? It's so interesting that when the discussion of Brexit took place, on one side you had a politician, on the other side you had an expert. You never had two experts. You didn't have somebody from the cold storage, cold network, let's say somebody from import-export explaining how Brexit would be good, and somebody from import-export explaining how Brexit would be bad. No, it was always the expert was saying it would be bad, and on the other side you had Nigel Farage. On the other side you had Daniel Hannan. On the other side you had Kate Hoey. You had Boris Johnson. You had Nigel Farage, Jacob Rees-Mogg, somebody like that. You didn't have an expert and an expert. The WTO and some headbanger. Why was that? Why was it always like that? Why wasn't it a case of, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to leave the European Union. We're going to have a referendum. Here is an information booklet we're going to send out to every household explaining the pros and cons of being a member of the European Union, pros and cons of leaving the European Union, and the potential consequences. And what we're going to do is we're going to have experts come out and explain to the public in information videos the consequences. No, it was the opposite of information. It was disinformation. There was Russian money involved, it seems. There was American money involved. There was people whose whole idea was it has to be about immigration. And of course the lies, telling people, well, of course we're going to be part of the single market. Daniel Hannan. Was it David Davis saying we're going to be negotiating with Berlin, not with Brussels. We're going to see the benefits from day one. Like, I still don't understand how people thought it was important to uphold the will of the people when the people had been lied to. It was a con. How can you defend that? How can you say, well, it was important that both parties, Labour and the Conservatives, maintained the referendum vote, when the referendum vote was based on lies? And the experts were accused of being of Project Fear. Yes, it was all like anyone who disagreed with Brexit in 2016 was part of Project Fear. The CBI was engaged in Project Fear. The Bank of England was engaged in Project Fear. Anyone who disagreed with Nigel Farage was part of the Project Fear group. And then, of course, Northern Ireland and Scotland voted against it. And was there any consultation when it came to, okay, what's going to happen? Should we consult the Parliament in Scotland, the government in Scotland, the administration in Northern Ireland? No. It was a UK decision, even though not all parts of the UK agreed with it. No, but the Lexiteers, I'm sorry if there are Lexiteers on this, and I don't think there are, but if there are Lexiteers listening to this, I think they're actually worse than Brexiteers, because they knew it was a con. They knew it was about lying to people. But their position after the vote was, well, we need to maintain the vote because it was, it was a democratic, it was an expression of democracy. It was a democratic vote. I had said on a number of occasions there shouldn't have been a vote. Shouldn't have been a referendum. It should have been done through Parliament, because the parliamentarians are paid £80,000-90,000 a year to understand these things. The average person on the street doesn't understand the European Union. I don't even fully understand the ins and outs of the European Union, and I've been talking about this for years. James O'Brien doesn't fully understand the European Union, and he's Mr. Brexit, James O'Brexit. Nobody, apart from, maybe Ursula von der Leyen or someone like that, fully understands how, and even the people at the top don't fully understand exactly how everything works within the European Union, because it's complicated. But relying on people who were told, well, everything will be wonderful, that they are supposed to understand how the European Union is going to work, or how it works, or how things are going to work after, is not democracy. How can people vote for something that they clearly didn't understand? Anyway, that's enough of my rant over that. I don't know how I got to about dentists, because there aren't enough dentists. So the people who said it was important for us to respect the vote in 2016, well, when they queue for a dentist, well, they should say, well, this is the consequence of our vote in 2016. It was more important that a lie was maintained than for us to have a dentist. I hope people will remember that, because that's the consequence of it. I keep coming back to Switzerland. If there's something dodgy about a referendum, the Swiss government say, okay, it's null and void, we'll have to have another one. Why didn't that happen with Brexit? Which is even more important, in a sense, than some of the votes that take place in Switzerland. Now, from one con to another,
now, in the last few minutes, the US Appeals Court has said Donald Trump is not immune from prosecution in the case, charging him with plotting to overturn the 2020 presidential election. I'm joined by our US correspondent, Mark Stone. Mark, President Trump facing a number of court cases. What is the significance of this particular development?
Well, this is significant. This was an attempt by Donald Trump and his legal team to argue that as a president or former president, he was immune from all prosecution. Now, had the courts agreed with that assessment, then in principle, it would have meant that many of these cases would have been thrown out just like that. So you could see how significant a moment this could have been. As it is, the appeals court, because this has been going through a number of different courts as Donald Trump's legal team tried to make their argument, the appeals court for the District of Columbia Circuit, that is here in Washington, D.C., 3 judges on that appeals court have been taking quite a long time to make their judgment. The length of time that it has taken them, weeks, has led some to believe that perhaps there was some dissent on the bench of those 3 judges, and that maybe it would go Donald Trump's way. Well, that is not the case.
The devil's toupee. Thank you so much, Alistair. Ranty Max, excellent to hear Indie Truck Davey-esque. No, Indie Truck does a much better rant than I do. Trump got fecked off in court again. Lock him up, yes. The consequences have only just begun. When in regards to Brexit, yes, the consequences have just begun. The UK has no money. No, not enough swearing to be Davey rant. No, Davey does a lot better. Look, when it comes to Donald Trump, I don't know if Donald Trump is going to... Does any of this matter? Because how many times have we been through this sort of charade? Donald Trump is going to go to jail. Donald Trump will be in jail. Donald Trump will be fined. Donald Trump will be bankrupted. Donald Trump is still around, unfortunately. I I have a feeling this isn't really going to make any difference. We've been down this road before, and also the Supreme Court is on his side, so it's likely that the Supreme Court will just go, yeah, it's okay. You still have your presidential immunity. Now, losing the immunity is pretty important, but does it make any difference to him when it comes to the election? I don't know. And I keep coming back to this point when it comes to the election. It will be a referendum on the incumbent. Are people happy with Joe Biden? Well, they should be, because the economy is doing a lot better than other economies around the world, the US economy. Unemployment, I think, is down. The cost of living is still being felt, of course, by people, the most vulnerable in society. Healthcare is still crap. Okay, that's not going to change, unless you're rich. So I think there's another angle to this, because Donald Trump is not new. People have already experienced a Donald Trump presidency. But it seems that the most important issue in many people's minds is gas prices. So people have been convinced, gas price is the most important thing to vote on. Okay, to hell with the future of the planet, to hell with having a quasi-dictator in charge. I care about my gas prices. When Americans pay almost nothing for gas and petrol, okay, in comparison to us in Europe. I stand by what I said on Northern Ireland. You can make your point on my video tomorrow. I'm not doing it here in the chat. Not sure what that's about. By Trump's logic, Biden could assassinate Trump and claim immunity. Yes. Would he have to do it himself, though? I wouldn't trust Joe Biden to carry it out. I am not advocating, of course, for anything like that. That would be terrible. But, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how close he'd have to get to Donald Trump to carry out the action. But I said, Brad. But it would be, an interesting legal test. Can the president give himself immunity? That's the thing. Or no, pardon. That would be a pardon. So he'd actually have to admit guilt and go to prison and then pardon himself or something like that.
These three judges have all concluded unanimously, we understand, they have completely rejected the notion of blanket presidential immunity. In other words, the case that this was related to, but it could have related to others as well, had it gone Donald Trump's way.
If Trump is elected, he'll just pardon himself from prison. Yeah, he'll probably do that.
But the case it's related to, which is his involvement in the January the 6th riots a few years ago, that case can go ahead unless, big but here, the Supreme Court of the United States takes up the case, because it is possible, even probable, that Donald Trump will appeal to the Supreme Court. They may then make a judgment, and of course that could go either way. So up some, a big win here for Jack Smith, the legal counsel acting against Donald Trump. A big loss for Donald Trump, but a way to go, because it could be appealed once again to the.
And of course, Trump has filled the Supreme Court with Republican loyalists. Now, I don't know whether they're Trump loyalists, but they could decide. No, this is pretty serious, because it could be a case that they go, no, we're not going to. Now, once again, I don't know if this will make any difference, because will it make any difference to his supporters? I don't think there's anything Donald Trump could do apart from, converting to Islam. I think that's the only thing that would turn off his supporters. Donald Trump could kill somebody. Donald Trump could eat a live baby. I think the only thing that he could do is if Donald Trump came out with a prayer mat, put it down, and started praying in the direction of Mecca. I think that's the only thing that Donald Trump supporters would go, hey, wait a minute. I didn't sign up for this. You betrayed us. He could do anything else. But apart from that, because I think their hatred of Islam, hatred of Muslim people, foreigners, is stronger than maybe their love for Trump. But that's just, I think that's the only thing. So if we could get Donald Trump to convert to Islam, then we'd be successful in stopping his presidency. I think that's the only way to go. So guys, we're almost at the end of the stream. I want to say thanks to everyone. Oh, there's one final story I want to cover before we go, because I think this is important. And then we'll stop.
You're extremely mentally unwell. A hospital, not a prison, is the right place to care for you. Sometimes even those who've committed no crime end up in a cell. It's a legal last resort when there's no mental health bed available. Today's report reveals prisoners becoming severely ill and patients brought in because there's nowhere else for them.
Just think about it for a moment. So there are no mental health beds available, so people are being put in prison. People are in prison on remand as well, for God knows how long as well. This is completely unacceptable. But once again, this is the consequence of Tory rule. This is the consequence of years of austerity.
Endure months of suffering behind bars. The Chief Inspector of Prisons, Charlie Taylor, says in almost every adult jail he's set foot in, he's seen desperately unwell people held in the bleakest of conditions. Those so driven to harming themselves, they've repeatedly blocked their own airways with bedding, removed teeth, or maimed themselves to the point of exposing their own intestines, frequently causing life-changing injuries. At Eastwood Park Women's Prison, Charlie Taylor found acutely unwell women held in appalling conditions. The bloodstains on the floor...
I'm sorry, I should have put up a trigger warning before this. Apologies for that. If anyone doesn't want to continue with the live stream, please switch off now, because this does contain very distressing content.
And scratch marks on the walls, grim testament to their distress. The inspector said they were under the care of prison officers with little or no training in mental health. Delays in referrals and assessments by psychiatrists mean most patients are left to linger in prison far longer than the 28 days the Mental Health Act recommends. On average, people waited 85 days, nearly 3 months, to be transferred to hospital. One patient was stuck in prison over a year. Today's report says delays in accessing the proper mental health care can cause irreversible harm. One forensic psychologist who's worked in prisons agrees.
I've worked with people who have struggled to get across into the mental health care system. And unfortunately, this isn't people who can be managed with the mental health needs in prison. This is people who really their needs are very acute, they cannot be safely managed, and they pose risks to themselves and others.
Just think about people with mental health issues being put in prison, being looked after, and I'm using the word very likely here, being looked after by prison officers. The prison officers have no training in dealing with this. Can you think of a worse place to put somebody with mental health issues?
Teachers, counsellors, all rolled into one.
Jails are overcrowded and understaffed. The prison service has been on a recruitment campaign.
Search prison jobs now.
Staff, sometimes without the right training, are being expected to care for those with psychosis and paranoid delusions. Some have been injured by violent patients. Today's report says action is needed to reduce harm to patients, but also those struggling to look after them.
Decisions to change this country for the better.
A draft mental health bill which sought to stop people being sent to prison for their own protection never made it into the King's speech.
No, but things like stop the boats, that's more important. That, handing over 300 or 400 million pounds to Rwanda to keep a few racists and bigots happy, that's money well spent, but not actually providing care for people with mental health issues. Not sending them to fucking prison. Welcome to Soviet Britain. I didn't know about this story until it came up recently on Channel 4 News. Build mental health hospitals. That's the question. But that costs money. Isn't it better just to hand over money to the private sector, to funnel money to government to Tory friends and donors? It's not just decline over the last 14 years. It's criminal. No pun intended here. The people who should be in prison are the Tories. Look at what they have done.
The League for Penal Reform is calling on the government to resurrect it and end what it calls the scandal of putting mental health patients behind bars.
I mean, prison wouldn't be good for anyone.
Like this is like something they did in the 1800s. People with mental health didn't even put them in prison. They put them in asylums. An asylum, which is a horrible place, would actually be better than a prison. Because at least you'd be there because you have some sort of issue, and there would be doctors there who are there to treat you, not prison officers.
Mental health. But if you're already in a mental health crisis, then it's about the worst place you could possibly be. And really, it should never have been considered as a place of safety. And I think particularly not so now that we are in the end in 2024. We should be able to do better than this.
Today,
I just saw a message there. Max, can you explain how Piers Morgan's deal with Sunak is a breach of the ministerial code? Because he would be potentially accepting money that would not be through the official channels. So if he did win the bet, he would receive £1,000. But that's not normally how you would, how would that be declared? Would it be a political donation? So this would be potentially, I don't know the full details, but it seems that could be a breach of the ministerial code.
Today's report from the prison.
David says we had mental health hospital. This change under care in the community. So in Scotland, there doesn't seem to be this problem. And just think about it for a moment, okay? Let's put independence aside for a moment. But when it comes to Scotland, the Scottish government are trying to do their best with a limited budget. And every time they try to do something more, the Tories attack them. Westminster attacks them, saying, oh, look at them wasting money. Like this, Scotland doesn't have independence, doesn't have complete control over its budget. So it's limited in what it can do, in what it can raise. Doesn't have access to the oil and gas revenues. They go directly to Westminster. Isn't it convenient that that isn't a devolved power? But when it comes to other issues, Scotland is way ahead as it's part of the United Kingdom. It's way ahead than other parts of the UK.
Inspector is grim, but it's not a new warning. The Chief Inspector points out he's been raising the alarm about delays getting mental health patients out of prison for nearly 2 decades. He concludes it should be a priority.
2 decades? People with mental health issues should not be in prison.
But it's not.
Well, I'm joined now by Charlie Taylor himself, who is the Chief Inspector of Prisons. We heard some of the incidents that you found there. Just give us a sense of how shocked you were and your team by what you discovered.
Well, Eastwood Park is a women's prison in South Gloucestershire. And I arrived at the jail and the team said, you've got to go down and look at House Block 4. You've got to go and see what's going on in there. And what we found was absolutely horrific. We come across some pretty shocking things as we walk around prisons.
Alistair Jackass, Section 35, our law that we try to pass in Scotland. And there are members of the Conservative Party who would like to get rid of devolution, who would like to impose a similar regime in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
But I've never seen anything like that. It was really horrifying, where there was one woman who was repeatedly running against the wall of her cell, banging her head against the wall, harming herself in an extreme way. And what really worried me was the gap between the staff who were doing the best they possibly could, but without the skills or the expertise or the knowledge to be able to care for those people, and the extreme needs of the women who were locked up.
It sounds like something from another century, really.
Yeah, there have been places where I've walked around segregation units, where I've walked around medical facilities in prisons, and it feels like an example of a sort of Victorian version of Bedlam. It's horrific.
And I mean,
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have to ask the Englishman for money. But what we must stop the boats. Yes, so Larry, that is the priority. To hell with people with mental health issues. I'm being sarcastic, of course. The focus must be on the boats, because Rishi Sunak said he would stop the boats, whatever the hell that meant. There's so much political, not just the money, but so much political capital being spent on stopping boats that they know that they won't stop, and not on things. There was a very good example of this today. Rishi Sunak was interviewed something similar. Rishi Sunak was interviewed about child poverty and child obesity and dental decline. So more and more, 1 in 4 children have tooth decay, 1 in 5 children are obese or overweight. And Rishi Sunak was asked about this, and you know what his response was? We've banned vaping. It's like he was asked about child poverty and child health in decline over the last 14 years, and his response was, yeah, but we cancelled vaping. Because cancelling vaping is something you can do with the stroke of a pen. You don't actually have to spend money. But actually dealing with problems in the healthcare system, dealing with problems in mental health require money, require investment, and the Tories are not interested in that. Why? This would be my question for anyone voting for the Conservatives. Why are you voting for a party that does not care about public services, does not care about investing? They care more about, distractions. They care about money for their mates, but they don't care about investing in public service. What is the point of a government? What is the point in voting for a party to be put into power if their priority is not school, education, health, and the well-being of citizens? A social safety net. What is the point of all of that? Because they hate foreigners more than, as much as I do. That seems to be the only driving motivation. I think another party may increase taxes somewhat and try to fund public service. Everyone relies on public services somewhat. Nobody's completely disconnected, unless you're Rishi Sunak, of course. But most people, the majority of people, rely on public services in some way. And surely you want those properly funded. And surely anyone looking at this says, this cannot continue. This must stop. People with mental health issues should not be put in prison. Prison officers shouldn't be expected to work as doctors and psychotherapists and psychologists and psychiatrists. That's not their job title. They have no training. And if you put somebody who has no training into a position, a difficult situation, they're going to use whatever skills they have, and these skills could have detrimental effects on themselves and on others. Alistair, thank you so much for that super chat. Scottish Government SNP has a social charter with its people, Max. That's why we are ahead of things than the rest of the UK. Because it seems the government care about people. We saw, and I'm not saying this because I support the SNP, but we saw with, for example, the baby box. There's no economic benefit of giving of having the baby box, but it shows that the country cares about the next generation. Here's a little box to help future mothers. The Tories are completely against something like that because why should we do that? I would love to hear Liz Truss or Jacob Rees-Mogg's response to something like the baby box. Apart from them saying it's a waste of money. Anyway, guys, we're almost at the end of the stream. I want to say thank you so much to everyone who came on. Thanks to everyone who sent a super chat. Thanks for your support. Thanks to the moderators for doing a wonderful job, as always. Before we finish, we'll end on a light note. We have to, otherwise we... I start swearing again. Let's put it that way. Make sure to check out Indie Chuck Davies' channel and Reagan Ali's channel and any other YouTubers who's on tonight. I don't see, but do check them out. Do support them. Before we finish, we have our one for the road. Enjoy this.
So, Minister, this is clearly an ongoing situation, but what are your thoughts? Well, obviously I don't know the full details. Oh, really? Okay, let's just leave it there then. What? You just said you don't know the full details. Yes? So perhaps we should wait until you do know the full details and then we can get your response. I'm very happy to give you my response right now, without knowing the full details. Of course. In fact, it's better that way. What do you mean? Well, it's much easier for me to bend my answer towards what I already wanted to talk about, isn't it? Okay. Oh, did you see that front page report in The Times today, suggesting that some of your colleagues are plotting against the Prime Minister? Well, I haven't actually read that report, but okay, well, what about... You didn't let me finish. You said you hadn't read the report. No, but I've heard reports of the report. What? I know the kind of thing it's saying, but you haven't read it. No. Why not? You knew you were doing an interview today, why didn't you read the front pages? I mean, obviously I did read the report. I'm just saying I didn't so I can look loyal and then dismiss it all as tittle-tattle. Tittle-tattle? It's what we call gossip when we pretend we're not interested in it. But you are interested in it. Of course, I've barely been off WhatsApp all day. Your colleague was caught on camera earlier today saying something pretty controversial. I didn't see that. Okay, let's try something else. Oh, did you see the new economic forecasts saying that the UK is doing better than expected? Of course I did. It's a testament to this government's hard work. And what if I told you I just made those new economic forecasts up? I'd say that Labour are trying to take us back to square one. And that's a bad thing. Yes, apparently. Thank you, Minister. Next up, we'll speak to two pundits from opposite ends of the political spectrum who'll both claim that what's happening right now perfectly supports their worldview and also coincidentally backs up everything they wrote in their new book.
Of course. So guys, have a great week. I'll see you on Friday, same bad time, same bad channel. As always, stay safe and take care. Good night.